Well, it's now 10:30, and that means it's time for Brainstorming the Human Connection. And we have an exciting show today. We have a little bit of housework to do before we get started, however. We always like to point out that this is an interactive program. That means that we look forward to your contributions in terms of ideas, questions, comments. If you've experienced some similar kinds of have you been to any of the venues, or just it's a conversation. That's what we like to. That's what we like to do, is have a conversation with the folks who join us here, and we have a couple of reasons a few reasons, I should say, we do that. At the top of it is we believe that people being engaged in a conversation helps us to get a better understanding, to retain more, to make the thing meaningful to us. So we like to do our program in such a way that you get the most out of it. And we figure the way to get the most out of it is to actually participate. Like anything else, if you participate in it, there's all kinds of benefits. So we like for you to participate. And the other thing is, as a country and as a people, we can use all the help we can get and all the opportunities that we can get to practice having civil conversations, having conversations where we exchange ideas, and we can let the ideas fight instead of us fighting. And so every time we can get this, we can create the opportunities to do that, then we feel it's useful. To that end, in the chat, you will see that we have a link, and we like to get your kind of feedback, because we have the conversation here, and we have a chance for you to give us feedback here, and that's always open. But some people are a little bit shy about, saying what they feel. Maybe they don't even have their ideas all together yet, because some people are verbal, and some people, they do better when they're writing and reading. We like to use all of the avenues for learning that we can. So to that end, we have a little a questionnaire. It's a 3-question or so questionnaire that Colby has designed to give us some feedback, because we can always use the feedback. What kind of programs, things that you think we should be brainstorming about, but maybe we didn't think of it, because all the ideas don't exist in my head, and they don't exist in even our collective heads as part of the Humanities Council. You have ideas too, and those ideas are valuable. What kind of things would you like to explore? Maybe we can find some people. We don't know all the stuff, but maybe we know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who could come on, and we could explore some topics. So this will give you a chance to explore, give us some topics that you would like to explore, so that, I could go on forever with ideas I'm exploring, but it's not about me, it's about you. So if you have some ideas, this is a questionnaire that can allow you to do that. We also have some questions in the chat about today's subject. And so some people don't have, maybe they didn't put their idea together, or maybe they have a question, but they don't quite know how to formulate it. So we thought, well, we'll give you some prompts so that when we get to a part where we can interact, maybe some of those questions, if it's not the exact question that you were thinking of asking, but it is a question that maybe should be asked. So if you see one of those questions that you would like to ask, we invite you to join the conversation in that way. That said, we now turn to our exciting program today. And we have with us Conor McMahon, and he's the director of the Journey Museum. And we're going to be talking about what the Journey Museum is just after we introduce Conor. Welcome, Conor.
Welcome. Well, thank you so much for having me here. It's my pleasure.
Well, first off, just so our esteemed panel here knows a little bit more about you, give us the 50,000-foot view of who the heck is Conor anyway?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, as you mentioned, I am the new executive director of the Journey Museum here. I've been in that role for just about 4 months, but I've been fortunate to have worked here at the Journey in the building for over a decade. And I've been a museum professional my entire life. I've been in the field for over 25 years now, and was really lucky to stumble upon the field just before I graduated college, wondering what I was going to do with a classics degree, a bachelor's in classics when I graduated. And fortunately, did an internship at my university museum, and I realized here was a field that could combine my love of history and science and art. And so I spent the first decade or so of my career working in the field of what we call art conservation. So I was really doing restoration and preservation of artifacts around the country, worked in Florida, New York State, Atlanta, and then finally in New Mexico for the state museum system out there, which was just an extraordinary experience. New Mexico has one of the finest state museum systems in the country, really just incredible collections and historic sites all over the state. And then I decided to transition more into the curatorial side of museum work. And so I moved back to Kentucky, where I grew up, and took a position at the Museum of the Horse, which is also a state museum there in Lexington, Kentucky. And I spent about 3 years there before wanting to get back out to the West. And I'd always been interested in working for the Department of the Interior. So I moved here to Rapid City about 11 years ago and started working for a very small federal agency called the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, which is under the Department of the Interior. And I served as their senior curator and oversaw 3 museums that they've operated since the 1950s. One in Browning, Montana, the Museum of the Plains Indian, one in Anadarko, Oklahoma, called the Southern Plains Indian Museum, and then here in Rapid City, the Sioux Indian Museum, which is now inside the Journey Museum, but was its own museum for many, many years, going back to the 1930s. So yeah, I love museums. I think they are an incredibly important and powerful institution within our society, a place for people to come together and have these important conversations and dialogue and get to know each other. And I hope that I can kind of continue that tradition here at the Journey Museum, and really make this a resource for both our local community, but from visitors, also visitors all across the state and the country who come here to the Black Hills region.
Excellent. Excellent. So we can see that you kind of know your way around the field, as they say. So happy to have you, and happy to have you as a guest. Let's start now talking about the Journey Museum. Tell us, what is the Journey Museum? Where is it? What could people expect to see or do or experience when they go there? What kind of things are you guys doing?
Absolutely. Well, I always tell people that the Journey Museum is one of the most unique museums I've ever been to or worked at. And the scope of it is very broad. We really attempt to tell the entire story of the Black Hills region. And the museum, when it was originally founded, was created as a partnership of multiple different organizations. And they all came together under a singular mission. And the mission of the museum is to preserve, educate, and explore the heritage, cultures, and environment of the Black Hills region, so that we can understand our past, enrich our present, and sustain our future, right? So you can see that's a pretty ambitious and broad goal. But I'd like to think we've done a pretty good job over the last 27 years of our existence. The museum opened to the public in 1997, actually. So we're, and it was envisioned, it was built by the city of Rapid City. So I always tell people I still am impressed at the foresight of the local government and the citizens of Rapid City back in 1997 to use taxpayer funds to actually build the facility. But even back going back to the early days, the museum's been managed by a nonprofit. So we're fortunate to be in a city facility, but also have the flexibility of being under a nonprofit umbrella called the Museum Alliance of Rapid City. And then these four founding partners that created the museum were the South Dakota School of Mines and their Museum of Geology, the South Dakota Archaeological Research Center here in Rapid City, which is part of the State Historical Society in Pierre, the Indian Arts and Crafts Board and their Sioux Indian Museum, and then what was formerly called the Minaloosa Historical Association and is now called the Black Hills Historical Society. So those four partners together curated the original exhibits of the museum, which are broadly divided into the first section is the geology and paleontology of the Black Hills. And then visitors move into a section talking about the archaeology of the Black Hills, covering the arrival of the first humans in the region, approximately 12,000 years ago, and then talking those being hunter-gatherers, and then kind of talking about some of the early agricultural peoples who were living along the Missouri River, and then ultimately migrations of Lakota people into South Dakota. And then the third large area of the museum that we cover is our Native American section with a primary focus on Lakota people. The collection held by the Sioux Indian Museum primarily comes from the Rosebud and Pine Ridge reservations, with some pieces also from Cheyenne River as well as East River. And then the fourth and final section of the museum covers westward expansion of the United States, the arrival of settlers, miners, homesteaders, and that section is curated by the Black Hills Historical Society. So those are our permanent exhibits. But we also do a lot of rotating exhibits as well too, and an ever-changing schedule of programs here as well too. And we try to kind of cover all four of those main areas: geology, archaeology, Lakota culture, and then westward expansion and early pioneer life in our exhibits and programs as well too.
So if I'm thinking about the permanent collections, is that to say that it's static? I mean, is it a permanent collection that's like a permanent idea and space that's given? Or are we talking about if I were to come back or to project myself into the future, that it would, 20 years, I would come back and I would see the same thing there?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And, those of us in the museum field, we often use the term permanent exhibits, which really we shouldn't, right? Because no exhibit should be permanent. It's not good for the artifacts to be on display forever, and it's not good for our visitors to come back after 10 or 20 years and see the same thing over and over. So really, we often use the word permanent, but really what we're talking about are long-term exhibits, right? And so those do rotate periodically. And collections too, as well, those are ever changing and ever growing. One of the rule of thumbs that gets tossed out a lot in the museum field is that most museums only show about 10% of their total collection. And that's absolutely true here at the Journey Museum, that what you're seeing on display, and we have hundreds and hundreds, thousands, in fact, of artifacts on display, but the total collections that are stored here at the Journey, held by the Sioux Indian Museum and the Black Hills Historical Society, those exceed probably 15,000 items total, and there's some really incredible collections. That's not even counting necessarily the historic photo collection alone that Black Hills Historical Society has. Is over 10,000 photographs documenting the history of the Black Hills region from the late 1800s up until today.
Mm-hmm. So now in what you said, there is a lot of information that you have, and only a small amount that you actually show. But still, when you go into a museum like the Journey Museum, do you ever get the sense that the people who go there get data fatigue? In other words, like they start walking out and they're really sort of curious and enthusiastic, but by the time they walk through about half of it, their eyes are like, they don't track anymore. And because I mean, a museum should it should prompt some deeper thinking, and that's good. But if you're not used to deeper thinking, I mean, you're not doing a lot of that every day, and then you get in a place like that. Do you ever get the sense that people have information overload?
Absolutely. And that is a really good and fair question. I myself, even as a museum professional, when I'm on vacation or work trips, I'm constantly visiting other museums. But even I, after a few hours, get tired of reading text, right? You can only do so much reading. And I get tired of standing. And, so it's really important. And that's a challenge that museums have to grapple with. And I've, dealt with that in my own personal career too, in terms of how to write text and develop exhibits that are really approachable for all audiences. I think it's easy for us who, have gone to graduate school in the field or been in it for a long time, especially when we become specialists in an area, right, to kind of overshare or overburden the public with information. And so the advice that I give younger professionals in the field, and constantly remind myself when we're working on a new exhibit or rewriting text for an existing exhibit, and that is, if your visitor or audience only leaves with one thing, what do you want that to be, right? What's that one underlying message that we want people to take home with them, right? And that's going to be different for every museum, and that's a really hard thing to do. I still struggle with it, and the answer might change depending on the month or the year, right? I think currently the big idea that we try to get across here at the Journey Museum is that the Black Hills are a truly special place, right? There's nothing else like them anywhere in the world. And they're unique both geologically and from a scientific perspective, right? The minerals, the paleontology, the ecology, right? This island in the plains that we live in is really unique. But they're also really special culturally. And that includes the Lakota people who have been here since time immemorial, and their rich cultural and artistic traditions. And then also unique with the arrival of the United States, right? And how that was handled, and then the blending of those two cultures. So I think it's a really special and wonderful place. And that's the message that, if somebody's never been to the Black Hills before, and we get quite a number of visitors who this is their first trip, right? That's the message that we want them to take away, that the Black Hills are truly a unique and special place. And then I think, if I had to choose a secondary message, because one of our major partners here is the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, we want them to leave with the understanding that Lakota culture is integral to South Dakota, and that Lakota people are still here, they're still alive, they're still vibrant, and that we should respect them as a sovereign nation.
Excellent. You have various things that you try to cover, and I want to get back to those, but I'm going to open it up now to our esteemed panel here. Does anyone have any questions, comments, experiences you'd like to share? Vicki, you look like you're chomping at the bit.
I do. Are you familiar with the Colorado History Museum? They have a big collection. And the collection, so what is the book that they produced on that collection? They sold it at the museum. But what I was getting at is I use that book because as historical, and also to trace my family and look at the photos. So do you have a book on your permanent collection, or could you get a book and then include your historical photographs, so that it's not just a museum book about a collection, but people in South Dakota can take this book and compare it to their family, the settling of South Dakota. I think his name was Bratley that had that collection. It was in Florida, and they couldn't use it down there, and they sent it up to Colorado. And two students were getting their thesis, PhD or something, and they got together and they put that book out. And they no longer carry it at the museum, but I use that book. I share it with my family and friends, and it's a historical overlook of South Dakota and the vast collection. And I just thought that was a great idea.
Yeah. That is a great idea and a really good question, and thanks for bringing that topic up. We currently, unfortunately, do not have a book or a single book that pulls together many of the collections here at the Journey. And as I mentioned, and this is a hard sort of arrangement to kind of understand, and it's one of the things that makes the Journey a little bit unique is that when the Journey was created, unlike the Colorado History Center, it was not envisioned as what we call a collecting institution, right? So the Journey Museum did not have a collection of its own when it was first created. The two main collections that are stored here at the museum and exhibited are actually owned by the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, the Department of the Interior, and what was formerly called the Minaloosa Historical Association, now the Black Hills Historical Society. I did just put in the chat, you can access the Minaloosa Historical Association has nearly their entire collection database available online through Past Perfect, which is a very common collections management database that lots of small museums use. So you can browse through their historic photo collection. You can even request copies of them, and they can send those electronically or even have printed copies at a reasonable cost sent to people. The Sioux Indian Museum, they do not yet have their full collection online, but some pieces have been, you can go to their website and there are selected pieces from the collection available online. And the one thing that within the museum field is kind of exciting is actually the Department of the Interior is working on a multi-year project that is launching right now, and over the next few months, stay tuned for updates in this. That is a new online collections database for the entire Department of the Interior collection. And one thing that I didn't know until I started working for the federal government is that the Department of the Interior holds the largest museum collection in the world, bigger than the Smithsonian, right? Now, and when you think about it, that makes sense, because the vast majority of that collection is archaeological and paleontological and natural history collections, right? Because anything that comes off federal land, whether it's National Park Service land, Bureau of Land Management, Department or Bureau of Indian Affairs, right? That all becomes federal property. So the DOI collection is approximately 300 million artifacts. So that explains why launching a new database for that is such a big project. But the big focus of that is to make those collections, because they're publicly owned, available online for people, so they're easier to access. But I love your idea of trying to put together a book to talk about the Journey Museum collections and all the partners here. That's something that has been talked about over the years, but unfortunately has never quite come to fruition. But we'll definitely add that to our list. You know, I have some big goals that we're laying out for the coming years as we settle in here and look towards the next decade. So we'll see what we can do about putting something like that together.
So if I'm understanding you, Conor, all of that 3 million, did you say 3 million or 30 million?
300 million, yeah. Yeah.
So 300 million artifacts, that's all in the public domain.
That is, yeah.
Okay.
And
is it like photographs, statues? I mean, what kinds of things are there in that collection?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's really anything you can imagine is probably in a federal collection, right? And I had the good fortune to sit on a committee for 10 years that was all of the national curators from the Department of the Interior. So the head curator, whether it was U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the U.S. Geological Survey, and they have everything from a pickup truck that was made by Ferrari and explored Death Valley in 1920 that's in the USGS collection, right?
Sure.
To extinct passenger pigeons that were collected from National Park Service sites, archival documents talking about the founding of Yellowstone National Park, dinosaur bones from all over the Western United States.
They sound like they sound like crows, you know.
Yes.
They just fly around anything they see. Oh wow, let's put that in our
nest. It's true. It's true.
I had one other question.
Sure.
And recently, artifacts, they're trying to get the ownership of the artifacts back to the tribe.
Sure.
Could you tell us how that affected your museum?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and something that all museums are grappling with right now, and that is the changes to the law that we call NAGPRA, which is an acronym for the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And the original law was passed in 1990, and the intent of that was to ensure that the primary intent was to ensure that the human remains that were held in museum collections were returned to the tribes. And in 1990, it was estimated that there were over 200,000 ancestors in museum collections. The vast majority of those are in large institutions that were founded in the 19th century: the Smithsonian, the Metropolitan Museum, Museum of Fine Arts Boston, Field Museum, those types of institutions, especially ones that were focused on anthropology and archaeology, right? It also applies to sacred items, or what we call items of cultural patrimony, and gave an avenue for tribes and tribal members to request those items be returned to them from museums. And there certainly was a lot of progress that was made over the decades, but there was also still a lot of work to be done. And frankly, some museums, while they might have complied with the letter of the law, didn't necessarily follow the spirit of the law. And so after a multi-year process, the Department of the Interior, just in January of this year, released updates to the regulations surrounding NAGPRA. And the heart of that was to shift the burden of work of the repatriation process from the tribes to the museums. Essentially say, museums, you all are the ones who collected these materials, which probably should have never been collected in the first place. So it's on you to take the initiative and figure out how to return those items to the tribes and to shoulder the costs associated with that, right? And a lot of museums, frankly, were a little bit unprepared for this. And so they have reacted in various ways, but I'm sure some of you have seen a lot of news stories about museums closing galleries entirely, removing items from display, covering items. Another big component of the new regulations is that now museums, before they display anything that might be considered a sacred item, they have to consult with tribes before putting those items on display. And that's an important and long overdue change to that law. As for how that affected the Journey Museum and the Sioux Indian Museum here, fortunately, it hasn't had a huge impact on this museum because the Sioux Indian Museum, and I was just giving a tour yesterday and talking with some folks about this. The Sioux Indian Museum, when it was founded in 1938, that was already kind of past the heyday of collecting human remains, fortunately. So there have never been any human remains or what we call funerary items, so items excavated from burials in the collection of the Sioux Indian Museum. And because the Sioux Indian Museum also has had the good fortune, and the Journey Museum, of being here in Indian country, right? We've always had this connection to the tribal communities and worked with them for decades and decades, unlike, you know, say the Field Museum in Chicago that hasn't always had the luxury of being able to just call their neighbors, right? And say, how do you feel about us putting this item on display? But the staff at the Sioux Indian Museum here at the Journey has taken a very close look at what they've had on display. There have been a couple of items that they've removed from display until they could talk with tribal elders, tribal historic preservation officers, and make sure that those items are okay to display. They wanted to be cautious and respectful of those items. So there haven't been major changes in the exhibits. They haven't had to close any galleries, but they did take a few items off display and are in the process of engaging tribal members and tribal communities to figure out what would be new items that could be put on display. So I know the staff there are working on a really exciting new exhibit to talk about the Battle of Greasy Grass, the Battle of Little Bighorn, but to talk about it from a different perspective and to focus on the Lakota individuals who were at the battle, right? So rather than tell the story of the battle as, you know, this happened at 12 o'clock and this happened at 1 o'clock and this happened at 2 o'clock, to focus on the individual stories of people who were there, folks like Fool Bull and One Bull. And the exciting thing is there are pieces owned by those individuals as part of the museum collection here. So people will actually be able to see the artifacts that these folks who were at the battle, folks like Dewey Beard as well, too, often called the last survivor of the Battle of Little Bighorn, and he was photographed by Bill Grothe up at Sylvan Lake in the 1930s. So stay tuned for that exhibit. Should be up in a few months, hopefully.
Okay.
Anyone else have questions, comments, experiences that you'd like to share with us? Going once? Well,
I have another question.
Okay, go ahead.
How do you conserve? You must have a huge storage area, a vault of some sort, you know, for conservation. How do you make the space for that? And then do you have a working staff that keeps it in prime condition? How are they handled?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And yes, there are some large collection storage spaces here at the museum. I often joke that having been to a lot of museums and worked at a lot of museums, I think we're really fortunate here that people were smart enough to put the collections on the second floor and not in the basement. Most museums stick them in the basement, which is, you can imagine from your own basement, is usually damp and wet and full of insects and not necessarily the best place to store your priceless collection. So we're really fortunate that the museum doesn't have a basement and that everything is stored on the second floor. And yes, it is a continuous process of caring for those collections. A lot of it involves what we call preventative conservation. So trying to prevent things from falling apart in the first place, right? And that includes really carefully maintaining our temperature and humidity levels, trying to avoid drastic fluctuations over short periods of time in temperature and humidity, monitoring for insects to make sure we don't have things like clothes moths infestations eating our precious artifacts, routine cleaning of artifacts on exhibit. So we have specially trained staff who know how to vacuum and dust artifacts that are on exhibit, periodically rotating things off exhibit. You know, ideally, you don't have something on display for more than a few years. Once you get up to having something on display for, say, 5 or 10 years, we definitely want to give it a rest, because exposure to light is one of the most damaging things for museum collections. And even though we try to keep our light levels quite low in museums, even those low levels can be kind of damaging for artifacts. So once we have something on display, we like to give it a little bit of a rest. And if something, if we do notice that something is damaged, whether through, say, an accidental mishandling or just from the effects of time, then if it's a minor thing, some of our staff can do repairs, or we work with specially trained conservators who can repair artifacts if major intervention is necessary. So, great question.
So one of the things that you talked about is the stories, and museums can prompt stories, especially seeing things that were used and made years ago by long gone folks. It does prompt stories. And can you tell us some of the kinds of stories that these artifacts can prompt?
Yeah. That's a really great question. And I think there's a particular collection here at the museum that I often kind of hold up as an example to help people understand how quickly and dramatically the Lakota world changed from the mid 1800s to the mid 1900s, right? And I think that can be, I know when I moved here to South Dakota, even though I'd worked with Native peoples really extensively in the Southwest, right? It's a very different story here in South Dakota than it was in New Mexico, where the Spanish first arrived in the 1500s, right? So kind of 400 years of, more than 400 years of history and interaction between Europeans and the Native Americans there. And the collection and group of artifacts here that I think really illustrate that story for Lakotas is a collection owned by a gentleman named Dewey Beard, whose Lakota name translates to Iron Hail. And I just mentioned him earlier. He was often referred to as the last survivor of the Battle of Little Bighorn, right? And so Dewey was born probably in the 1860s, late 1850s, 1860s. So he was just a teenager when he was at the Battle of Little Bighorn. But he was born to an important leader, Lakota leader. He was Hunkpapa, was his Lakota Oyate. And, as a young man, he experienced the wide open grasslands and prairie of South Dakota, right? Hunting bison from horseback. There were no settlers here, right? And then he was at the Battle of Little Bighorn, and in his own memoirs, even though he never learned to read or write, he would often recount his life history to people who'd record that. And that was his first battle and the first time that he killed a man in battle, right? Then and he fled with, I want to get my history right here. He then became part of Sitting Bull's band and fled to Canada with Sitting Bull, and spent some time there. Then returned to the United States during the Ghost Dance era in the early 1890s, and was at the Wounded Knee Massacre. At Wounded Knee, he lost his wife, he lost one of his children, his brother. He himself was shot, but survived the massacre. And then a few years after that, he ended up joining Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Buffalo Bill hired dozens of Lakota people to work in his Wild West show, and Dewey Beard traveled the whole country, even went to Europe with the Wild West show, was actually left behind there accidentally. Fortunately, found another Wild West show to bring him back to the United States. He then made his way back to South Dakota. This is during the early 1900s by now, so we're in the allotment era in which the federal government is basically trying to break up the communal property on the reservations and turn Lakota people into farmers and homesteaders. So Dewey Beard gave a go at that. He got himself an allotment of land on Pine Ridge. He remarried. He built himself up a little ranch and a farm. He also started dabbling in he was in a few Hollywood pictures, right? So Buffalo Bill Cody at that point also was trying to make a film about Wounded Knee, and Dewey Beard is cast as an extra in that. And he finds himself with sort of bit parts in a few other Western movies. Then World War II rolls around. Ellsworth Air Force Base is created. And with that, the Air Force is looking for places for their bombers to practice. So they, in a deal between the Department of the Interior and the Department of Defense, a large portion of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is handed over to the Department of Defense to be the new bombing range to serve Ellsworth Air Force Base. Dewey Beard and approximately 200 other families lost their homes. They were given about 2 weeks notice to clear out before the bombing started. So he yet again lost his home, had to relocate. He ended up moving to Rapid City and kind of moving back and forth between Rapid City and Badlands National Park. And he would spend his summers at Badlands National Park, sort of greeting tourists. He was, everybody knows Ben Black Elk and his time up at Mount Rushmore. Dewey Beard was kind of the equivalent for Badlands National Park in the 1940s and 50s. And then he spent the final decade of his life working for what would become Black Hills Badlands and Lakes, now Black Hills Badlands, as a tourism ambassador. But the point of that is, I always try to impress to people, can you imagine, in one person's lifetime, going from hunting bison on horseback on the open plains of South Dakota to seeing the atomic bomb dropped, right? And appearing on radio and television interviews, right? And that's Dewey Beard's life. So I think, and we have this collection of artifacts here at the museum, everything from a U.S. cavalry bugle that he picked up off the battlefield, right, and that his cousin inscribed his name in, to the outfit that his wife made for him that he was wearing at Badlands National Park in the 1940s when he was taking photographs with tourists and everything in between. So what an incredible life and story, and the artifacts really help tell that and share that with visitors.
And that really that is an excellent story and an excellent example of giving insight by one person's story. It's just like all of the different events, and it brings, I think it can help bring to life, let's say bring to top of mind that we are talking about human beings, because history can get to seem almost like a cartoon when you get so much information that, it's just like actors moving around, but you don't get the depth of, this is a human being, flesh and blood, experiencing something that is unique, and it really brings a lot of humanity to the story. And I'm glad you shared that story with us. Tell us a little bit more about why the stories are so important.
Yeah, that's a good question too. And I think, museums, especially history museums, and the Journey is in a big part a history museum, have undergone kind of an evolution over the last few decades of moving away from trying to tell history as just a series of events and focusing on these important themes and ideas and individuals like we just talked about. And to me, I think that's important, because when you frame history as the story of individuals and also their relationship with places, right? And what makes those relationships special and unique. I think that's something that virtually anybody can connect to, right? Regardless of your upbringing or your background or your beliefs. It makes us realize that we really are more similar than we are different, right? And I think that's an important space for museums to fill, especially in today's environment, right? Where sometimes we can find ourselves so divided on things, is that museums really strive to be a place, and at our best, we're a place where everybody really should feel welcome. Everyone should feel represented. Everyone should be able to see their own stories and see themselves in museums. And that's one of the things that the Journey has started to do in recent years and will continue to do even more as we move forward, is making sure that really we invite the whole community in to kind of tell their own stories and to share that authority. Museums, certainly when they were created, it was a very European colonial mindset of we are the place of authority, right? And we decide what's important to share and what stories to tell. And it's that might have made sense 300 years ago, right? But we've come a long way as a culture and as a society. And now I think it's a much more exciting and culturally rich and vibrant approach to really invite everyone together. And sometimes that can be challenging, right? You tell about the good things that happened as well as the bad things. But if we don't acknowledge all those different facets of history and acknowledge that there are multiple truths too, right? I think that's one thing that the history field and museums as well too, a lot of times in the past, there's been this idea that if you just do enough research, you'll eventually figure out the truth, right? But we're trying to move away from that because truth changes, right? History is not just like a hard science, right? Like biology. As you learn more, you change your ideas and you change your theories. So even history is the same. As we do more research and include the voices of more people and more cultures into our historiography, perspectives are going to change. And it's important that museums recognize that and adapt to that.
Well, it seems also that it should prompt the perspective that that's how we should always be, is always expecting that our ideas today are temporary. It's like, based on what we know, it seems as though this is the truth. It's kind of like when Einstein was talking about even his theory of relativity, he said, it seems as if, this is the case, but when you get more information, you change. And it seems that one of the roles of the museum is to organize, collect and organize these new pieces of information so that we can reconsider our perspectives. We have the mutually verifiable data. That's the part that I think a lot of people get when they say, when they talk about facts, that those facts are mutually verifiable. And I think museums provide a place where we can go to mutually verify, oh, this is a thing. We may have another discussion about what that thing is, but it's no longer just like part of our imagination that the thing might exist. We can see it. And we can actually start to put some, let's say, some cornerstones into our belief system, and they may move too, whereas we get more ideas that are a more reliable cornerstone and maybe a stronger one. We're moving quickly up on our, the end of our program, and you guys have some events that are coming up, and I want to give some time to have you talk to us about the events that you have coming up. I think one is on the 11th and one's on the 17th. Can you talk about those?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we do have a lot of exciting things on the horizon here at the Journey Museum, and I'd invite you to visit our website, journeymuseum.org. We can drop that in the chat. We just launched a new website recently with the goal of more effectively and clearly sharing information about what's going on at the museum, right? And as we look towards the future of the Journey Museum, we envision ourselves obviously as a museum, right? But also as a community space and a community center. And so we want to present interesting and enriching and educational exhibits, but we also want to do some fun things as well too. So a couple of things in the near future that we have coming up on May 11th, we are going to have a very special series of events working with a gentleman, really talented Lakota artist named Keith Braveheart, who organized and curated an exhibit called We Are a Horse Nation that several years ago, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that opened at the Red Cloud Heritage Center in Pine Ridge and traveled to multiple venues around South Dakota. It was on exhibit at the Dahl Art Center here in Rapid City, and even went to other states. Keith documented the whole process of developing that exhibit and its travels and has made a film about it. And so he's going to premiere his new film on May 11th here at the Journey Museum. So we're really excited about that. And then we're going to have some community events and discussions to go along with that. Panel of artists, Lakota artists like Don Montelo and Martin Red Bear will invite to share their experience. And then a very talented artist named James Starr comes out, who makes horse regalia and horse masks. We are going to have a special honoring ceremony for the horse, and we'll have some horses here and dress them, and people will have the opportunity to see a horse in full dress regalia. So we're really excited about that as well too. And then on May 17th, we're going to open a new exhibit called Quilts Illustrated. We are working with the Black Hills Quilt Guild. It is the 50th anniversary of the Black Hills Quilt Show, which the Guild organizes each year. And so in celebration of that, we are partnering with them to present this exhibit. It will be a free exhibit in our Adelstein Gallery that will be open all summer through mid-September. And there will be approximately 25 quilts covering almost 200 years of quilting history here in South Dakota. We're working with SDPB, which produced a really incredible documentary on the history of quilting in South Dakota, and they're actually creating a special version for us that's just about 15 minutes long that will be screening on rotation in the gallery, so people can learn about this incredible tradition. And then we also have another exhibit of quilts by a Lakota artist. Carol Wilcox is her name, and the Sioux Indian Museum, one of the partners here at the Journey, is producing that exhibit. That's a free exhibit as well too, so I hope people can make it here for that. And then if you're local, I'd encourage you to check our website. We should be announcing this formally tomorrow, but we are working with the Devereaux Library at the South Dakota School of Mines to bring their Nostalgia Night film series here to the Journey Museum. So we will have some wonderful films in April that we'll be showing on Sunday evenings. And then we hope to continue that this fall. We have a really fantastic theater here at the Journey Museum, and we're excited to work with groups like the Devereaux Library and SDPB and other organizations to do more film screenings here. So even if museum exhibits aren't quite your thing, we want to be accessible and offer something for everybody here, and whether that's entertainment or education.
So to that end, what kinds of ways can folks partner with you to further your journey?
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy to put my email in the chat here. You can also contact us through our website. Feel free to give us a call, but we're always looking for community partners to help us develop new exhibits here at the Journey Museum. So if you have an idea or a collection that you might be interested in working with us on, please reach out. We have a really wonderful program series here that we've been doing for 7 years now. It's called Turtle Soup, kind of a funny title, but serious topics. We do that every Friday from fall through spring. So we have a few more coming up. We'll wrap up May 3rd, will be our last Turtle Soup program. But we have various guests from around the community talk about topics that really cover the 4 main areas of the museum that I touched on. So this Friday, John Gozencenter is going to come give a talk about Lakota perspectives of space and place. And then we're going to follow that up with Dr. John Keller from the School of Mines, who's going to talk about art and engineering. We've got folks from the DC Booth Fish Hatchery and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service who are going to talk about the history of both the hatchery and the programs that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does. So we're also always looking for speakers who might be interested in presenting as part of Turtle Soup. So if you have a good idea for a topic related to the history, science, or cultures of the Black Hills, please reach out as well too. We'd love to hear from you.
Great. Are there any other questions before we continue? And we're getting near the end of this. Any other questions, comments?
I have one. Can we see these on YouTube, some of these events? Do we have accessibility? Are they filmed, videoed, I mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. Many of our programs have been filmed and are available on our YouTube channel. There's a link to that right at the top of our website. And I can't say, unfortunately, that we've filmed every program, but we do our best to film most of them. And we have plans to continue to improve on that. And we hope by next fall, we might be able to record and possibly even stream all of our Turtle Soup programs.
Excellent, because that was going to be a question I would ask also, Vicki, is, how accessible it is it to people outside of the Black Hills area? Any other questions? How about Betty? She hasn't asked a question in a long time.
I've been so busy listening. Is there a fee to go into the museum to visit? I can see myself wanting to go over there and go in and out for days in a row.
Sure, that's a good question. We do have an admission fee for parts of the museum. Our admission fee for adults is $14, but that's good for 2 days. So if you can't see it all in one day. We also offer memberships that are good for a year. We also have recently, in trying to make the museum more accessible, we've recently partnered with the Rapid City Library, and they purchased several family membership passes. So you can go check out a family pass from the library, just like you can check out one for the South Dakota State Parks. That pass, I think, is good for a week or two, and you can bring up to 4 people to the museum on that pass. We're also working to plan certain free days for the whole community. So last year, for example, and we plan to do this again this year, the entire museum will be free for Native American Day weekend in alignment with the Black Hills Powwow. So you can stay tuned for more information about that on our website as well too. And as I said, we try to do free exhibits as well too. The quilt exhibit, Quilts Illustrated, will be free. So yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good. Anybody else have any questions, comments, criticisms, complaints?
Yep. We welcome that too.
Throw it all out there. Okay. Well, this has been a great conversation, Conor. I'm really looking forward to some opportunities to put more wind in your sails. I really like the things that you've been talking about and how important they are to all of us, not just a few people who actually go to the museum and who put it together. But there's a ripple effect I find in these kind of activities when you get the kind of information that we've been talking about today out to the general public. Now I think more than ever, we have to get those stories out, and they have to be accessible to people, and they have to be accessible to people who don't even know that there are stories. And so your work is, to me, that's kind of critical critical work to have going on right now. And thank you and your staff very much for making that available to us. It enhances the lives of all South Dakotans and those who enjoy your museum. With that, we actually have come to an end to this program. 11:30, and that's the end. Thank you so much, Conor, for joining us. Thanks all of you for participating in this conversation. Please do take a few seconds. Up at the top or bottom, you will see 3 little dots. Click on those dots and you can download all of those things in the chat, so that will allow you to look at it later and use those links to get more information that we didn't cover. Lots of information that Colby has been diligently making available to you. Don't miss it. Thanks, everybody, and see you next week, same time, same station.
Thanks, everyone.